Now that we've finished up markets and the construction of a market, the modeling of a market, and injecting shocks into that market and using comparative static analysis to determine what happens to equilibrium prices and quantities in a market, we're actually going to take a slight step back and analyze something called price elasticity of demand. So we're going to take a step back in the sense that we're only going to be working with the demand curve again. Price elasticity of demand is simply a measure of how sensitive consumers are to a change in the price of a product. Okay, so as price changes by some percentage, what is the percentage change in quantity demanded? Okay, so we're analyzing relative movements along the curve, along the demand curve. We're not shifting the curve when we analyze price elasticity of demand. We have essentially two ways of looking at price elasticity of demand. And one is across markets, okay? So what I like to call relative elasticities. In other words, if you have the market for cars, how sensitive are people to changes in the price of cars relative to how sensitive they are to changes in the price of motorcycles, for instance. And then we have within markets, and we're actually going to see something quite interesting when we measure elasticity values within a market. What we're going to find is, depending on where you are on a demand curve, where the price level is, people are going to be more or less relatively sensitive given the current price of the product. It'd be interesting to see this anyway. So we're going to start with relative elasticity. Now let's imagine an extreme case, okay? Whereby the demand curve for a product is perfectly vertical. That's a D, by the way. You're used to my D's by now. So the demand for a product is perfectly vertical. Now, in this case, using the definition of price elasticity of demand, people are obviously completely insensitive to a change in the price of the product. In other words, if I raise the price from some P prime to some P double prime, increase the price level, quantity demanded doesn't change at all. I could double the price, I could triple the price, I could raise the price by 1,000%, and quantity demanded doesn't change by anything. In other words, people purchase exactly the same amount of product regardless of how high the price goes. And of course, I could reverse this. I could cut the price by 50%, cut the price by 75%, doesn't matter. People will consume exactly the same amount of product. Now, we call this perfectly inelastic demand. Okay, so this is perfectly inelastic demand. Again, if you think of the concept of elasticity or elastic or something like that, in terms of, say, a rubber band, and sensitivity is in the concept of sensitivity of being as being very similar. We would simply say that consumers are insensitive to a change in the price of this product, and we would call that perfectly inelastic. Okay, now let's take the other extreme. Okay, so assume we have a demand curve that's perfectly horizontal. Well, in this case, assume consumers are purchasing QD units of the product, whatever that is, 10 units, 1,000 units, 1,000,000 units, doesn't matter. Now assume the price of the product rises. What happens to quantity demanded? Well, it goes to zero. In other words, I could raise the price of this product by a fraction of a cent, literally a fraction of a cent, and people will purchase none of the product. We call this perfectly elastic demand. Okay. Now let's think about the products that are represented by these two extremes here. Well, if we think about this product, what is a product that you could double the price of and people purchase exactly the same amount as they always did? Well, this would be a product for which you have no choice but to consume it. So you could imagine a life or death pharmaceutical, for instance. You're on liver rejection medication. You either purchase the liver rejection medication to keep, assume you had a liver transplant and your body naturally wants to reject foreign organs, and so for the rest of your life, you're probably going to have to be on some sort of medication that tells your body not to reject that organ. Well, if you don't take the medication, then your body rejects the organ and you die. I hate to be that blunt with it, but that would essentially be a good for which there is perfectly inelastic demand. You will pay whatever price you need to because you'll die if you don't if you don't take it. Over here, however, we have quite the opposite. So here there are no substitutes for this product, and not only are there no substitutes, you need the product. You can't not take the product. Okay, you cannot not consume the product. Over here, however, we have completely the opposite situation. Over here, we have a perfectly substitutable product. Okay, in the sense that if I raise the price of this product by a penny, quantity demanded of this product goes to zero because I can always move over to this product's perfect substitute. Okay, so this would be a case where there's perfectly substitutable good. You could think of assume well, for instance, a lot of people see gasoline, believe it or not, as to a great extent perfectly elastic. When they're shopping around for gasoline, they simply go to the gas station that has the lowest price on the sign. Any gas station that charges even a penny more will sell no product to those people who view gasoline as perfectly substitutable. You could think of another instance. Assume you view bottled water as perfectly substitutable across firms. In other words, you think all bottled water is the same. Well, if you can get a 24 pack for $24.98, for $2.98, and right next to it is a pack for $2.99, and you view them as perfectly substitutable goods. Obviously, you're a rational agent. You'll use all available resources most efficiently to achieve your desired end. And if you see those two products as identical products, even if their labels are different and even if they're made by different companies, you will purchase the 24 pack that is a penny less. Okay, and the company that is a penny more will sell none of the product. Okay, that's perfectly elastic demand. Okay, perfectly substitutable goods. We have the less extreme positions of demand. Okay, so we have a relatively steep demand curve where if I change the price by some amount, I get a relatively small fall or increase in quantity demanded. Okay, so I raise the price by some amount, I get a relatively small fall in quantity demanded. I lower the price by some amount, I get a relatively a small increase in quantity demanded. In other words, the curve is relatively steep. We simply call this inelastic demand. And, many products have that. Gasoline in and of itself. So here, if we're looking at different brands of gasoline, you're driving by gas stations, you may view it as perfectly substitutable good. But gasoline overall, we think, is people are fairly insensitive to a change in the price of gasoline. If the price of gasoline rises, you will use less of it. You'll go to the store less frequently. You'll go on fewer vacations. But the bottom line is you need to put gas in the tank in order to get to work. So you're going to be relatively insensitive to a change in the price of the product. That would be an inelastic demand. On the other hand, we can have a case whereby we have a relatively flat demand curve, and if we change the price of the product by some amount, you can see we get a relatively large change in quantity demanded of the product. Okay? In other words, people are relatively sensitive to a change in the price of this product. Okay, for instance, think about candy bars. Well, the market for candy bars overall. Well, there's a lot of substitutes for candy bars out there. There's bubble gum. There's gourmet chocolates. There's mints, things like that. I mean, just stand in a line at a grocery store one day, and you'll see what I'm talking about. There's a bunch of alternatives for just the candy bar. Well, if candy bars become more expensive relative to these other products, well, it takes no effort to reach over and grab a pack of mints instead, maybe. But that would be a case where people are relatively sensitive to a change in the price of the product, and we call this elastic demand. Okay, we call this elastic demand. Okay, so let me go over these again. We have complete insensitivity to a change in the price of the product. We call that perfectly inelastic demand. We have complete sensitivity to a change in the price of the product. We call that perfectly elastic demand. We have some sensitivity to a change in the price of the product, but for the most part, people are relatively insensitive to a change in its price. We call that inelastic demand. And then finally, we have a demand for which people are relatively sensitive to a change in the price of that product. You raise the price by some amount, they'll reduce their consumption of it quite a bit, but not totally eliminate their consumption of it, and we call that elastic demand.